Hi, welcome to the Portuguese Museum, the only museum in the United States dedicated to the preservation of Portuguese heritage and culture. We're going to have a quick tour of the museum, and I hope you enjoy it. Come on in. We start here in the beginning of the museum talking about the Portuguese contributions to the Age of Discoveries. Many children come to the museum during the year. In fact, we think about 30,000 kids come to the museum here in San Jose. So we want to have them learn about the Portuguese and their contributions, especially during the Age of Discoveries. We tell the children that, indeed, during the Age of Discoveries, most of the heavy lifting were done by the Portuguese. We talk about where the Portuguese went in the world, both in the New World and Old World, and into Asia. And we tell the children that because of the Portuguese contributions and the Portuguese development during the Age of Discoveries, that now Portuguese is the seventh most spoken language in the world. So these are some introductory things that we tell the kids as they come here. Then the museum has kind of like a story that we try to unfold. First, we tell the story of the Portuguese immigration. And so here, there is this timeline here that develops what was happening in the world, in the United States and in California as it relates to the Portuguese. And we especially talk about the two waves of huge immigration, the first one just before the 1900s, and of course the second one that's come to the United States because of the Capelinho eruptions in 1957 and 1958. We continue the story here. We talk about the Portuguese here in Santa Clara County. We've had many families that have come here, and so we've talked about the history of the families when they came and how they contributed to the development of Santa Clara County. Some of the Portuguese here have developed, especially the dairy industry, when the dairy industry was large in Santa Clara County. But Portuguese also were some of the early home builders in the county. They were part of the civic society in El Viso, and many historical places now here in San Jose used to be Portuguese properties. For example, we have a place here called Vasona Park. It used to be the Alvernage Dairy. We have a place called Raging Waters. It used to be the Swadge Dairy. So many of the elements of the old Santa Clara County used to be Portuguese, and there's been a huge history here since right after the gold rush. As you probably know, Portuguese are very Catholic people. So we focus much on the Portuguese and their ties to the church. Particularly here in San Jose, we have Five Wounds Church, which is celebrating its 100th anniversary in 2019, which will be one of the major exhibits that we will have here in the museum. So we tell a history of the church on these panels here, and of course we have some important crowns that we've developed that have been donated to the museum over the years. We think that the most important one here is this one right here, this darker one. You see it's a different color from the others because it's actually not silver or silver plate, it's actually made of tin. And we've dated that crown back to around 1850. The Portuguese, the most important cultural and religious aspect of the Portuguese here in California is the festa. And as you see here, we have a lot of the accoutrements of the festa, especially the capes of the queens. And so we have many queens capes in our collection here, and we bring these out and we show these during the year. Another thing that we do here is that many of the kids who are not Portuguese, we tell them the history of the Portuguese festival, Portuguese festa in California, and they're quite amazed at what the history is. Every year, the museum has a different exhibit. That puts a bit of pressure on the museum to come up with an exhibit, but we think it's very important because there's so much history and culture to talk about. So this year in 2018, our exhibit was about the Portuguese history and involvement in the development of Macau. So these are some of the panels that we've developed about the history of Macau. And we've worked with people in Macau to develop this history. We're developing relationships with many different organizations as they tie into the Portuguese Museum. So we had a very interesting time this year developing this very interesting exhibit. Portuguese are very good at handicrafts, and we have an exhibit here especially about the different handicrafts that the Portuguese have in terms of carving, needlework, and other types of pottery, other types of work that the Portuguese are very good at. So this is a very beautiful museum exhibit here that we have showing that type of artistry that we have in the museum. Right here is an exhibit about the calçadeiros, about the important sidewalk artistry that's found in the Portuguese world. Wherever you go, Lisbon, Azores, Rio, Macau, you look on the sidewalks and we have this beautiful sidewalk artistry. So we've had an exhibit here, how it's made and how important it is. And if you look in our outside in the front of the museum, you'll see our plaza, which is made by people coming from the Azores, and they've actually spent months here developing our plaza. One of the major exhibits that we have in the museum is this exhibit that we call the Power of the Spirit. And what it really does is encapsulates the Portuguese history in California. When we developed a book a few years ago called The Power of the Spirit, and we actually captured 42 churches in California that the Portuguese built or majorly remodeled, all the way from Hawkinsville near the Oregon border, all the way down to St. Agnes in San Diego. So in telling the stories of these different churches, you can also tell the story of the Portuguese in that area. For example, the Portuguese fishermen of San Diego, the Portuguese people, farmers who are developing the sweet potato industry, the Portuguese dairymen, the Portuguese people developed the Sacramento Delta area, and of course our Five Wounds Church here in San Jose. So this exhibit tells how these people settled in California and what they did in their specific areas. This is our exhibit about probably in the early days and even until today, the Portuguese were probably most noted in terms of agriculture or ranching is in the dairy industry. So this is an exhibit about the Portuguese in agriculture, specifically in the dairy industry. However, they have been very instrumental in the sweet potato industry and other endeavors. Here in the Bay Area, over the last 15 or 20 years, the Portuguese have been very important in the development of drywall in the construction industry. In fact, most of the buildings in Silicon Valley today, I would bet were built by Portuguese, at least in terms of the drywall that went into those buildings. This is an exhibit that we have about our fraternal societies. Historically, there were 6 fraternal societies in California. Now we have 2, but we have been able to keep some of the memorabilia and historical elements of the early societies. These were especially important in the early years of California before we had Social Security and stuff. It was the societies that took care of widows and orphans. When people died, they had the societies to rely on. Okay, now we're in the basement of the museum. Originally, we were going to have one level, but we found out very quickly that we have so much material to display that we actually had to have 2 floors. So luckily, when we were building the museum, we decided to have 2 floors. Currently, in our basement, we have this beautiful exhibit here that was donated to the museum by Mr. Brazil. Mr. Brazil came to this country as an older person, but he remembered his life back in the old country, and he had this great art of being able to do these carvings. So after he passed away, his family graciously and generously donated this beautiful exhibit telling the life in the old country. So you could take a look at many of these scenes here that depict what was life back in the old country. And even today, many of these scenes are still available. A few years ago, we decided to implement our exhibit there about life in the old country with this exhibit of a Portuguese kitchen. The most important room in a Portuguese household is a Portuguese kitchen. All the life revolves around the kitchen. So we developed this replica of what a Portuguese kitchen would look like, say, somewhere around 1940, before the big immigration to the United States. So this came out of the memories of many of the people on the board, and so we were able to recreate this kitchen. Another interesting exhibit that we had, or donation, we had here from a Mr. Belém. Mr. Belém was a whaler, and he came to the museum a while back, and he said, well, I'd like to make a donation to the museum. And so we said, sure, I'm glad to take something. And so he said, okay. And about 3 or 4 months later, Mr. Belém came back with these instruments that he donated to the museum. These are instruments used in whaling. One is the lance and one is a harpoon. So if you wanted to go whaling today, which in the United States is illegal, but if you wanted to go whaling today, you could take those instruments and just go whaling. They're actual real instruments. This exhibit here is one of our more poignant exhibits. It really tells about the heartache of leaving the old country and coming to a new country. This is a very famous painting in the Azores that we have reproduced here, and it talks about the immigrants waiting on the dock to leave. And this exhibit here is an actual trunk that was sent to the United States around 1920 with some of the items that an immigrant would bring with them. As you see, many of these items are special items to them, pictures, photos, documents that have special meaning to them. This year we put in another new exhibit, and this is a very fun exhibit that we've developed here for children. We call this the university that we have here. We're actually teaching many of these children that I talked about before. When they come to the museum, we're actually teaching them Portuguese. So on this panel here, we have the name here in English, and of course you could just pull the name here and it would say what the word would be in Portuguese. So airplane, avião. So this is a very, very exciting exhibit that we have. We have many, many children here that come here, take a look at the exhibit, and they learn not only Portuguese, they learn a little about the islands. And we have another exhibit over here about different Portuguese foods in the world. And so they get an idea of how Portuguese has affected other countries. For example, the egg tarts of China, the tempura of Japan, the malasadas of Hawaii, the vindaloo of India, and of course the Portuguese were the ones who really introduced tea into England in the 17th century. So the children get an idea of really the importance that the Portuguese have brought to other parts of the world. This here is our most exciting exhibit that we've developed. This has just been completed this year, just a few months ago, and this is our theater. So what we're doing now, over the years, the museum has been open since 1997, we have many, many exhibits that we have in storage. We have no room to take them out. So what we've decided to do, we're going to digitize those exhibits, and we're going to display them on this touchscreen television. So this touchscreen television, you could come, if you want to take a look at an exhibit that we had in 2000, you'll be able to touch the screen and it'll pop up the exhibit. So it's a very exciting exhibit, and it'll be important, so if anybody wanted to come here, they will be able to take a look at other exhibits that we don't have on the wall. So here's an example of what the exhibit will look like. We'll have different elements of the exhibit. So if you wanted to talk about our musical heritage, you would touch this exhibit here. And then this is the menu of all different bands that we have in California. For example, let's put the Nova Alianza band. So here's our Nova Alianza band in San Jose, and we even have the ability to play music. So anyhow, this is our very first exhibit that we put on our theater, but a year from now, hopefully we'll have many, many, many more exhibits that will be interactive. So you just come up here and you can go through a whole bunch of different things here. Go backwards, we can talk about history. We can talk about, say, Capelinhos. And here's history of Capelinhos. So and you can go through this, and there's many slides here and giving you a history of the Capelinhos volcano eruption, which created a whole new history of the Portuguese in California. Here on this wall here, you could see all the different bands that we have in California. And we're looking forward to the new band here on November 3rd. The bands will have their yearly band festival, I believe, here in San Jose. So we look forward to working with them and promoting our band exhibit here. Our most popular exhibit that we have here, and it's been here for many years, but it's probably the most popular, is our exhibit we call the Hawaiian Connection. It talks about how the Portuguese came to Hawaii and how they settled there and what they did. So it's a beautiful exhibit. Now we tell about this entire story that's captured in this journey of the Thomas Bell. There was a man, Mr. Oliveira, who kept a journal of one of the voyages from Azores, Madeira, to the Azores, to Hawaii, around Cape of Magellan here. So it's a very interesting story, and we have been able to capture it here in our Hawaiian Connection exhibit. This is the end of the current exhibits we have now. This is our exhibit on the Capelinhos. We talk about the beginning of the Capelinhos, the resultant destruction that happened to the island because of the volcano and because of the earthquakes. And of course we talk about what happened after the Capelinhos in terms of the development of the diaspora of all the Portuguese because of this who came to the United States. And then actually, as this group of Portuguese have reinvigorated our community here in California. So we were able to tell the entire story. So We've gone through the museum here in about 10 or 12 minutes. If you came to the museum, you'd probably stay here a couple of hours absorbing all this stuff. And like I said, this is only a small sample of the exhibits that we've had here since 1997 when we opened the museum. So I hope that you'd like to come to the museum. We are open on Saturdays and Sundays between 12 and 4 or by appointment. We have a website. Just Google Portuguese Museum San Jose and it'll give you the information that you need. So thank you very much.